you. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for having me here today. What a beautiful story and what a beautiful event. One of my roles in Seattle also is to be the chapter chair for the MIT Enterprise Forum in Washington State. And I have to say this event has raised the bar of what we will have to look forward to as well across the organization. So let me ask you a question. How many of you consume electricity? Okay. How many businesses could function if it did not consume electricity? We frequently forget that energy and electricity has been with us for such a long time that we don't remember the story of the electron and how we got to where we are. And because of that, about a third of all energy consumed in the US is in the commercial sector. And the Environmental Protection Agency estimates that 30% of that is wasted. And so when we look at that then from a whole perspective across the country in the US, that is $50 billion of economic waste that is not put to good use. So we can start asking the question, what does that mean? What would that translate to if it was economically productive? Well, let's assume you have a 1% profit margin business. And let's assume that 3% of your operating expenses is energy. Well, if you do the math, you immediately find out that you could double your profit margin if you eliminated this 30% waste of electricity and energy resources. So let me ask you this question. Energy has been with us, electricity has been with us for so long. What was the problem that it was trying to solve when we built the grid? And to start answering that story, we have to go back to 1891 and to analyze the business case of the Niagara Falls Power Company. They had a very specific problem. They wanted to move 100,000 horsepower from the city of Niagara, from the village of Niagara, near Niagara Falls, all the way to the city of Buffalo that was 18 miles away. Because at the village of Niagara, they had 300 factories, and they were going to replace 300 water wheels with electric power, or with power transmission. But the village only had 5,000 inhabitants. And when they did the calculation of revenue, they realized that they could not generate enough profit to pay for this project if they just served the village of Niagara. But 18 miles away was the city of Buffalo that was growing by 10 to 20% every single year, with factories, with electric streetcars. And they realized that if they could somehow transport that power from Niagara Falls to the city of Buffalo, then the financial viability of this project was going to be assured. We see, just from this slide, the exact problem that we're trying to solve. We need to move 100,000 horsepower 18 miles. If you think about that, what are we trying to move? We're trying to move horses. Well, how many different ways do we know to move horses? And it turns out there's lots of options that we have. For one thing, the city of Paris had for 20 years operated a pneumatic system to deliver mail that was the size of the entire city, about a mile across. And so you'd put a little container into a tube, and the tube would suck the letter away and deliver it somewhere else. So we know we can move power with compressed air. We also know that we can move power with ropes and wires and gears and levers, as you see in the bottom corner. The city of Zurich and the city of Belgrade transmitted power from the rivers by a distance about 3 to 4 miles in order to run factories that were in the center of town. So think of the San Francisco cable car, or think of a ski lift. That was how those cities ran their factories. We can also transmit power using steam. The factories actually consumed steam as part of their boilers. And so why don't we deliver the product that the factories actually care about? And oh yeah, on the bottom corner, what you see is a photograph of an electric streetcar from the city of Portland, Oregon. They drew a electric wire over Willamette Falls for 14 miles, and they ran those electric streetcars for 9 months before the system was destroyed by a winter storm. So in 1890, if you're making a technology selection with 3 options that have been around for 20 to 40 years, and 1 option that was destroyed in 9 months, which one would you choose? Well, obviously we know the end to the answer. They chose electricity, they chose electric power, and more specifically, they chose the AC version of electric power. The reason why they chose that was because it solved the problem. It was the only one that could transmit 100,000 horsepower a distance of 18 miles. Well, what does that mean for us today when we start consuming? And so let's look at this. It should all look familiar. It's the charger on your laptop. This tells us exactly what we consume. And if you're like me, you'll probably wonder what all of these symbols mean. And if you're also like me, you'll spend an entire Saturday trying to figure all this stuff out. Well, most of the symbols are safety standards. Whether I'm in the US or the UK or Europe or Japan or Norway, what this is telling me is the device won't electrocute me. A number of these symbols also are environmental symbols. So don't throw away into your normal garbage, recyclable, lead-free, etc. Let's look at the numbers, though. These should also look familiar. 60 hertz, 120, 240 volts, 2 amps. Little wavy thing means alternating current. Where on this brick does it say I consume energy? Now, if you're an engineer, yes, you can go and calculate the energy draw of this brick by looking at the voltage and the amps and doing a calculation. But does this device consume electrons, or does it care about how the electron is delivered to me? And if we think about it, I actually care that I have electrons delivered to me at 60 hertz. It's far more important than just getting an electron. So now we start to see the difference between energy and power. Mathematically, the relationship between energy and power is related to time. And we typically describe energy as how much water we have, and we describe power as how fast that water is flowing. But from a business point of view, what I like to say is, if I care about energy, what I'm buying are electrons. If I care about power, I'm buying electrons on demand. And when we start thinking about that, all of a sudden we see that those are two very different products, two very different services that require different infrastructure and different ways to deliver. So what do we care about? Do we care about electrons or do we care about electrons on demand? And this immediately discrepancy shows one of the problems and challenges, I think, of the renewable energy sector. What does renewable energy deliver? Electrons. What is it that the end customer wants? Electrons on demand. And so until we can bring those two concepts together, until we actually make the product mix, it's going to be very hard to get renewable energy onto the grid. And so technically, the solution to this is actually storage. If we put in energy storage and batteries, we are now providing renewable power. The other way that we can approach this problem is a managerial one. How can we get companies now to think that they're consuming power rather than think that they're consuming energy? So let's think about how a business then consumes. Certainly there's electricity, there's water, there's trash, natural gas, there's all different sorts of bills that we have to pay on a regular basis. There also are internal costs like facilities, capital maintenance, and sometimes external incentives that we have to do. Now, why does a business consume this? Well, because I have customers that I have to serve. And at the end of the day, when I put all of these costs together, it's going to be about 3 to 5% of my operating income. Now, if I start thinking about the fact that I need to consume this to meet my customer need, I also have to be aware of the risks. What happens when I have equipment downtime? What happens when there's new technologies that come to the market? I somehow have to still be able to respond and manage all of those things. And today, what we like to say is, this is an unmanaged department for a company. There's no visibility around all of these costs as we put it together, because this is, at the end of the day, the utility line item that a business is consuming. And so anytime there's a lack of leadership and low visibility, what we have is waste. And so we justify the 30% waste that's going on in the commercial sector, the fact that no one actually knows what's going on. And that is why we propose the position of that chief utility officer, a new corporate position to support the CFO and the COO to understand this line item and to manage this line item. And actually there's a lot of precedence for it, because we saw this exact same evolution happen in the CIO space, the information space, over the last 30 years or so, when we went from just a single engineer every 10 years buying from IBM to today when digital technologies are being used for competitive advantage of each individual company. Well, if we think about it, we no longer just buy electricity by paying the bills. We can buy solar panels, demand response, energy efficient light bulb, Teslas, you go down the list. We can now start thinking of energy management for competitive advantage inside of a business as well. So what does that mean? Some of the best practices of chief utility officers of this concept that we've talked about have been done. Most of the leading companies follow this type of a 5-step process. Setting a strategic vision. Why do we consume energy in the first place? And then gaining certainty over those assets of how we're actually consuming. And frankly, a lot of companies just stop right there, because that's the 50-page audit report that sits on someone's desks no one does anything about. But the leading companies continue on, and they continue on by de-risking and actually implementing projects. And so here's an example of a client of ours where we helped them figure out 5 different categories that they should work in, and here's a couple of example measures that they could do to improve their utility budget and the utility line item. Well, once we have the list, we can start prioritizing which ones to do based on their vision that we helped them set much earlier on. The great part about having an entire list, though, is now we can start seeing synergies and how these measures interact. And we notice that set points is incredibly important to this business. And so an information management system actually becomes a very important energy measure to be able to reduce and continuously improve this business. And then lastly, once we do all of that, we can help increase the productivity of our clients. And so, for instance, trying to help them develop carbon neutral product offerings, or looking at how they can become more resilient to emergencies and have better uptime and preparedness. At the end of the day, once we get a process going, you know what you can do? You can automate it. And you want to be able to automate the most critical, central, and uniform part across this entire process. And what we have come to believe is that the most fundamental part of this process is understanding the budget and understanding the cash flow, how your money is getting spent through this entire process. And so that's what we did. We created a financial platform that basically helps a CFO understand this utility line item. And so whether it's at the very top, where we're just putting together all of their monthly expenses, their capital budget, maintenance budget, et cetera, into this line item, to helping them manage a revolving fund, so that way every time we do a measure, the savings show up back in the fund that they can invest again into the future, and a list of ongoing projects that they will always want to do in order to continuously improve their program. Well, the funny part is, once you show a CFO what they're spending, guess what they want to do? They want to spend less. And with just a little visibility and a little guidance, in 2016, we reduced bills across our portfolio by 11%, just by giving this visibility. And what's fascinating to me is we achieved this 11% reduction by implementing 9 projects out of a list of over 100. So it gives you thought of just how much more opportunity there is to continuously drive and continuously improve. Just as important to lowering costs, though, is managing the ongoing budget variations from month to month. And so when we work with the client and we flatten out and smooth out this utility line item, they no longer have to worry about the month-to-month variations and volatility that they spend on utilities and all these different decisions. So how do you get started with something like this? How do you create this initiative inside of an organization? And this brings me to a story of the Styrofoam cup. Microsoft was the first company in the world to implement an internal carbon tax. Every single project manager has a line item of a carbon tax that pays into a corporate fund, and that corporate fund then pays for energy efficiency and other carbon reduction measures across the organization. Now, that's a really big idea and a really big project, and they were the first company in the world to do that. It all started with one guy having a cup of coffee one day going, "Why am I drinking out of a Styrofoam cup? Can we get rid of this Styrofoam cup?" So he started asking that question to a couple of his friends, and no one knew the answer, but he kept asking the questions to more and more people, and pretty soon he formed a team that was company-wide that was asking the question of, why are we still using Styrofoam cups? Well, lo and behold, that team was successful in eliminating Styrofoam cups from Microsoft, and they ended up going to compostable. That was a great win for the team. Now the team needed something else to do. So they tackled another challenge. and they solved that one. Then they tackled another challenge and solved that one. And pretty soon, 10 years later, they had implemented a carbon tax, an internal carbon tax within Microsoft. And so it comes back to the theme of this talk today. Think big, act small. Start with a styrofoam cup. Change the world. Thank you very much.